Good morning, family. It's better than that, but okay. Superficial spirituality is enough. Is it? We adjure you by the name of Christ, who Paul preaches. One translation says, they were overcome by those who had the demons to the extent that they left the room, I like these words, wounded, bloodied. Been there? I'm afraid when it comes to spirituality, there are an awful lot of us that are going to leave the room wounded, bloodied, because our spirituality may be less than what we claim. Maybe less than what we desire, but less, nonetheless. I confessed to Paul a little while ago, about a month or so ago, when he gave me this assignment. I sat down right away. I had my outline. Well, it's changed 4 times since then. And I think it's changed because the deeper I got into this particular subject, I had to look at my own spirituality. So I began this morning by confessing to you that what I'm about to do is with a lot of me connected to it. But more than that, a lot of we. As I realize who I walk with, who I live with, who I talk with. And so, let me begin by defining what I'm going to talk about when I talk about spirituality. It comes down to 3 basic things. First off, I'm going to have us look just a little bit about the fact that spirituality begins first with what I allow in a genuine way of God in me. Again, allowing God to work in me first. Secondly, it's how I allow myself to be present to God. And thirdly, how I allow myself to walk with God. So when I talk about spirituality, I'm going to look at it from those 3 different points of view this morning. And I want you to know this is going to be very short, sweet, and to the point, as straightforward as I feel like it has to come from me this morning. See, because I look at this subject, superficial spirituality, it's not enough. Because for me to be genuine about God in me requires a lot. I began first with the Sermon on the Mount, looking at Jesus. And in the Sermon on the Mount, just chapter 6, if I look at nothing else but chapter 6, those things that we normally measure as our intimate relationship with God, about how we see the world around us, how we pray, how we fast, what we consider important or treasures in our life, all 4 of those things in chapter 6, Christ challenges us to look at ourselves and think, why are we doing those things? Why are we standing before the crowd giving to the poor? Why do we, in that statement of our intimacy, why do we pray? Is it about a genuine desire for God to be in me, to interact with me? Why am I fasting? Why am I devoting this time, apart from everything else, to God? Is it for me to be seen of men? Or Is it really about God and I? Really, God and I? Don't lay up for yourself treasures in... No, don't lay up for yourself treasures. Lay up for yourselves there, right? What's important? When it comes to allowing God that space, that genuine space where God will walk and talk and work in my life in ways that change me and transform me and allow me to become everything that He truly desires me to be. Am I really, honestly, open to that work taking place within me? Especially those of us in ministry, where it's so easy to be in the limelight, where it's so easy to step into other people's space. Not everyone who says to me, uh-oh, here it comes. Not everyone who says, look what I've done. Look how many things I'm doing in your name. Look how many things I'm accomplishing for your sake. And there's going to be that time where I stand before God and say, look. And He says, who are you? What does that space look like where I invite God in and I invite God to change and to mold and to make me? Work out your own salvation with fear and with trembling. Why? Because it's supposed to be God at work in you to will and to do for whose good pleasure? Is superficial Christianity, superficial spirituality enough? What about that realm, that second realm, that realm of being present to God? John 4, 22 and following. True worshipers. I love that phrase where it says, true worshipers. They're the ones God is really looking for. I like that little phrase. The ones that God is really looking for. You see, He wants a genuine group of people who are going to approach Him in, you know the two words, right? In spirit and in... Oh, we abuse this verse. And we make this verse all about some doing that it's never intended to do. Because that word for in spirit and in truth, that word for truth, is a word that means in actuality. In reality. It's a word of quality. What about you presenting yourself to God? Do you present yourself to God in actuality? Present yourself to God as what kind of sacrifices? Living sacrifices. Because again, what kind of worshipers is God looking for? So don't be conformed to, but be transformed by the renewing of your... Why? Because here's where real worship takes place. So that by testing, you may discern. It's an amazing word, that phrase. So that by holding God up, holding my life up to that, He says it's about changing my life in such a way that I present myself to God in this most genuine way possible. And it's only when I do it in the most genuine way possible that I can truly discern what God's will is for my life. Is superficial spirituality enough? How can I present myself to a God I don't know? Because I've stopped short. Because I'm thinking like everybody else. Can I do that? I don't know. Census guys, all of us together this morning, I was struck by another place here. Ephesians 5:21 and following, where we're told to submit ourselves one to another out of reverence for Christ. This is another way we are told to present ourselves to God through Christ. Yes? And it begins, he says, by submitting ourselves to one another. I wonder what our superficial spirituality might look like when we measure that in terms of your responsibility to your family. My daughter, 30 years old now. I remember when we sat across the table not so long ago, and she said, "Dad, I need just to say something. I am so proud of who you are as a preacher and all that you've ever done. In fact, you've changed my life because of your example. But Dad, there are times when you weren't there. I remember so many times when I needed you, but you were cleaning up this mess or dealing with that family, and you were away taking care of that issue, but we were here." When we present ourselves to God, there are priorities and there are ways that we are told to stop and to consider, and it's submitting ourselves one to another, and the responsibility that I have to submit myself to the needs of my wife and my children is just as important. In fact, before God, more important than all of the time that I devote to everybody else. That is where my ministry truly begins, when I say I do. "Oh Lord, look how many things I've done for you," while my daughter is crying in the back corner. Is superficial spirituality enough? And last, being present with God. Being His presence. The face of Christ. Letting what I do know about God, where God is invited into my life, and where I truly am willing to present myself to Him, and allowing that to grow and become me. Is it enough to do that superficially? By this, everyone will know. No, really, they'll know that you are what? What does that take? You know the answer, right? By this one thing, that one thing is how we what one another? We say that so easy. Do we not? And yet, how superficial. How superficial when leaders deal with one another. How superficial when we're called to step in the arena of Let's just call them what they are, our enemies. And by the way, I think it says somewhere where we are to see them in that exact same way. We're to do what? Is superficial spirituality enough there? Is it enough to say, I love you? Is it enough to say, I love you with the love of Christ? Oh, isn't that what John said? We're to love them as He loved. I'm sorry, say that again. Something's missing there. I'm to love others as He has loved. Put your name there. I'm to love them as... You see, I know me. I know Brandi. And I know what it takes to love the man that I am. I know what it is for him to say, I love you, and I forgive you, and I give you grace. I know what that is because I know who I am. And I cherish when he says, I love you. By this, they'll know. What is true religion? Undefiled? Before God? Oh, it's telling everybody that I've got it all together. It's telling everybody, I really do care. What does James call that? A lie. He says we deceive ourselves. No, true religion, true allowing God in, true presenting myself to God, true spirituality comes out when I don't stop with I say, I love you. But when I step into the arena of somebody else's life, and when I am willing to meet them where they have need, and I'm willing to see myself for who I am, and understand that I need to present myself unspotted, to whom? It's interesting. Not just unspotted to God, but unspotted to the world, because after all, I'm walking with Him so that they can take their eyes off of me and see whom. So that they can see whom. Please say this like you mean it. Superficial spirituality is not enough. You are salt, you are light, because out of you or through you, the world is not going to see your deeds and your works apart from your relationship with. Do you believe that? Then spirituality, superficial spirituality, is not enough. Because this is not about us. It is about Him. Oh, I have a long list. We could talk to elders in churches, evangelists, those who God has appointed as leaders in the church according to Ephesians chapter 4, 11 and following. Oh, they're His men for His cause. It's so that how many in the church can begin to look like Jesus? Every joint supplying, right? Yes or no? How many favorites do you have? How many do we let sit aside because of our measure of their spirituality and their talent or their gift? And yet, who has given us that spiritual assignment? Is it enough to be superficial in that just cause? Is there any wonder why churches fight and refuse to receive one another as brothers? Who refuse to walk together in the one cause that changes the world, where we are called to go into all the world and preach a gospel so that those who are lost can be found. Is superficial spirituality enough? I don't think so. I think the reason I struggled with putting this lesson together is because I always came to this point. You see, at this point, I have to stand in front of a mirror and look at myself. And guys, I don't mean this with any pride or arrogance. If you're not doing exactly the same thing, that's between you and God. But I'm sorry for you. If you and I are not willing to measure our spirituality, again, that place where I am willing to allow God actually in my life, and where I'm willing to give myself to God in every way He demands of me, then I'll never be able to walk with Him the way that I need to walk. That is where you and I have to tell ourselves the truth. I leave that with you this morning. Response is entirely up to you. May the Lord bless.